Mobius Foundation organized its 5th International Conference on Sustainability Education in New Delhi. The conference featured several keynote addresses on the theme Educating for Climate Action and Sustainability. Mobius Foundation and India Today Group took forward their joint campaign Viram Agenda Sustainability with 2 special thematic sessions on the first day. The panel discussions were preceded by a chat with Mobius Foundation Chairman Pradip Burman and Rajdeep Sardesai.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very special show that we are having, where our focus is on the topics of the 21st century, really. Climate action, sustainability, and population dynamics. That's what we're going to focus on, and I'm delighted to be in the company of Mr. Pradip Burman, the Chairman, Mobius Foundation, because the foundation is the one which has driven this entire project. And as I was telling Mr. Burman before we met here on stage, is that you are in tune with what the new age India really needs. We need less politics, and we need more focus on real issues of our times. So Mr. Burman, I wanted to understand from you, your vision, why you chose these issues, and why you believe that these issues are the relevant issues of our time.
The reason I chose these issues, there were about at least 17 issues from the sustainable development, like the SDGs are 17, so I'm just saying 17. But nobody talks about population, that's one reason. But the second reason is that I felt that population was the most important aspect of sustainability which nobody talks about. This is the focus area of Mobius Foundation, is education. Now, these are both long-term issues which will help sustainability, because if you're looking about population stabilization, it's a minimum 60 years to 100 years before it stabilizes.
If I were to turn, like journalists generally tend to sort of be a little skeptical, only for the reason that there is a lot of talk now in this country on population. There is more and more conversation around climate action. But the reality at the end of the day is that there isn't enough action on the ground. Do you believe that these are all wake-up calls? All these events that are taking place are, in a sense, wake-up calls. That this is a country, unless the disaster hits you right in your face, you don't wake up to the reality despite all the conversations around it.
That you're partly correct, but I wouldn't give it all the way, because we've been talking about population stabilization from the time of 1947. Now, people are taking action because they feel, really because of climate change, they're taking action. All these things are due to climate change. They don't look at population. They don't look at population. But population has automatically been controlled by education. It is already less than TFR, what you call the total fertility rate, is below 2.0 in all the countries except maybe Nigeria and all the Western countries that are developed. They are educated, and it is below 2.0. India has still got 100 districts, over 100 districts that are above 2.0. And we intend to go to 100 districts to provide contraception and to control the population.
A final message to a younger audience out there?
I think the main issue to be looked at is that the planet is being poisoned, the climate is being destroyed, and it is your future that you have to save. So save nature and do something about it. Join some group or the other. I wouldn't say anything about population, because anybody that's educated is not going to have more than one child, because they can't get into school. The major problem today among youngsters is that they cannot get their children into the school that they want. This is the major problem. So they will automatically have less children, that is no problem. But loving nature, saying that nature is what I live on, and therefore I need to protect it, otherwise I will die.
Congratulations for putting all this together, Mr. Burman. Give a big hand to someone who's actually driving this entire foundation. Mr. Burman, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this India Today special at the International Conference on Sustainability Education being brought together in partnership with Mobius Foundation. We're joined on this special by a very distinguished panel. Please welcome David Richardson is CEO Population Crisis in the United Kingdom. Poonam Mutreja is Executive Director Population Foundation of India. Alistair Curry is Head of Campaigns and Communications, Population Matters United Kingdom. Nandita Bajaj is from the Population Balance in the United States. Give them a very big hand, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to start with you, Poonam Mutreja, because we are discussing this at a time when India's parliament has finally passed or is set to pass the contentious Women's Reservation Bill that will provide 33% political representation to women in parliament. And yet the truth of the matter is, in India in particular, women still, particularly in rural India, face marginalization and often disempowerment. How do you then empower women so that women become really the driving force in ensuring population stabilization?
The most concrete way to empower a woman is for her to have a right on her body, her life, her freedom to make decisions. And the first begins with her education. If we invest in women's education, it's not just family planning. It is about giving a woman opportunities, at least opening opportunities. And education, again, has been known to be the best contraceptive pill.
David, you've been at the forefront of addressing notions of population dynamics and sustainability. How do you see the intersection between climate action and gender equality? It's one thing, as we are talking, we need to empower our women. What will that do to the larger fight for ensuring climate action?
I had to think about this question very, very carefully and very long. And I'll put them in order of priority. I think the impact of climate change on gender inequality, or equality, you would say. Women are particularly vulnerable in India and in developing countries. The second thing, obviously, I'm going to put in and reassess again, education. Empowering women is terribly important. They need education because that delays marriage, that will give them opportunities of learning, that will give them opportunities of getting better jobs. Women are incredibly better communicators than me, sitting here, and would get her point across in no time at all. I think women have been kept out of technical innovation, therefore they will play a major part if they can be educated in what they call the STEM technologies, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Another thing is terribly important, climate change intersection and climate change and gender inequality is the right to health care and reproductive rights. And then finally, policy and advocacy. Women are much better at dealing with in leadership and community development and getting the feeling of climate change across. After all, you educate a woman, you educate the whole family.
Alistair, you've been advocating for a sustainable global population. How do you persuade people, and I refer here to men and women now, on climate change and sustainability? Probably even more difficult at times in societies like ours where there are still sharp gender inequalities. But how would you go about do that? Where do you start?
It is a very challenging issue. When I first took this job 6 years ago, I saw the job advertised and I thought, well, that's a no-brainer. Of course, if you have more people, that's going to have an impact on sustainability, on poverty, on all sorts of areas. And I was very surprised when I actually took on the job to find that people were resistant to that message. And I think it falls into a number of areas. The first is just understanding. Intuitively, people do understand that. But actually, if you move just even a little bit higher up into the often the environmental movement, into policymakers. There isn't as much understanding as you might expect. One example which I constantly give is that the IPCC, in its last report on mitigation of climate change, said that the two strongest drivers of climate change, of emissions through fossil fuel use, are GDP per capita and population growth. So at that policy level, there is a lack of understanding, not across the board. I think if you look at, for instance, UNEP or some other UN agencies, they clearly make the association, but it often isn't recognized at policy level. And then another, I think, very important thing at a personal level and at a policy level is discomfort with this subject. But I think we should also recognize that everything we've been talking about here, about education, about female empowerment, about addressing, tackling poverty, we know that gender inequality is the strongest driver, the strongest correlate with unwanted pregnancies, for instance. But the word population often suggests something which is more contentious. But the reality is that if we're not talking honestly about the challenges, we're not going to solve our problems honestly.
Nandita Bajaj joins me from the United States. She works with population balance. Nandita, you've written many articles on how population denialism, this is a term you've used, is harming the most marginalized communities and accelerating our ecological and social crises. Can you briefly explain what you mean by population denialism and how we can address that specific issue?
Thank you for having me, and thanks for that question. So population denialism, it's an ideology, partly Alistair referred to it a bit, that says that population growth does not have any or much impact on the environment or on the people, and that therefore there's no need to talk about it, there's no need to address it. People do not understand that our planet is finite and that we are in a state of extreme ecological overshoot. We're consuming 75% more than the Earth can provide sustainably, which means we're actually stealing from the future. We're stealing from our children and from our grandchildren and taking away an opportunity for them to have a good life. We have seen in recent news that 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries have been crossed. Of course, climate crisis is one of them. The biodiversity loss and the extinction crisis, where we are losing species at 100 to 1,000 times faster than pre-human times. We're seeing resource scarcity, especially dwindling freshwater supplies, where over a couple of billion people are living in water-stressed countries today, and nearly 5 billion people will be living in water-stressed countries by 2050. So, we're seeing crises like the refugee crisis. So over 1 billion people are going to be displaced from their homes, from their countries because of the climate crisis. And as my panelists have mentioned, it's the most marginalized communities that are impacted the most.
Interesting term, population denialism. Poonam Muthreja, you worked extensively in this field for several decades. There have been those from time to time in this country who've advocated legislation. Bring in legislation on population control, either by incentivizing people or disincentivizing people, that if you have more than 2 children, you won't get a government job. Will that really give women the strength you believe? Is legislation the way forward, or is it, as you kept saying, education, education, education?
I have no evidence from the world, Rajdeep, not just in India, that coercive population policies or programs or coercion of any kind, including incentives and disincentives, work. The amount of energy we spend on diverting the debates on coercion, even in India, we spend less time providing not just education, but family planning, health, and other services that empower women, including female workforce participation. We've spent too much, our politicians have spent too much time on debating and discussing and thinking only of a 2-child norm and so on. Second, I want to say that incentives, I want to give a good example. India has a meager budget of 1.4% health, and within that, it has a meager budget of 4% on family planning. It's gone to 6% now. 6% of the family planning budget, we did a budget analysis, we spend on incentives for sterilization. 85% of this 0.4%. And the other amazing thing, let me tell you how misguided our policies and programs have been, is that 77% of the women who experience sterilization have never experienced family planning before they went through sterilization. And I want to end by quoting the World Population UNFPA report. When the world reached 8 billion, they said 8 billion possibilities. Once people are born, you have to see them as a resource, invest in them, and stop spending time on getting diverted.
Alistair, to you, how do you see the balance between addressing overpopulation and respecting individuals' reproductive rights and choices? As Poonam has pointed out very clearly, coercion is not the answer.
I think it is. It clearly is, and I think if I may just brandish this report, as we were talking earlier on, people think about China and India, but in fact this report that Population Matters produced is looking at those exemplary policies that have been adopted in other places, which
Give me an example.
So Thailand, for instance, Rwanda. I think very few people would think of Rwanda as a place which has got a very strong population policy in which they're very clear. They say this is not about controlling people, this is about empowering people. This is the approach that Rwanda has taken. And it is following a very simple recipe. If you empower women, if you tackle poverty, if you give people access to contraception, which still at the moment there is an unmet need of 250 million women in the world who have an unmet need for contraception. If you give education, we know again that education is one of the key drivers that will bring down fertility rates naturally. Yes, I do believe it is also important to give people advice about what the implications of a large family are, or a larger family, and I think that particularly applies in high-income, high-impact countries such as the one I come from, where the environmental impact, the carbon footprint of a single individual will be multiple times that of someone in India or elsewhere.
David, is the progress slower than what we might have anticipated a few years ago in solving the overpopulation issue, or is the glass increasingly half full? Is the world increasingly recognizing the need to control population?
I'm sure people are recognizing we've got to control population, but humans by nature are very stubborn. We have a very deep-seated belief in our own reproductive behavior. Another thing is, I've asked many people about their country. Do you think it's always India, or it's always somewhere else, always China? It's never the UK. Of course, with them are those population countries in the world. Absolutely ridiculous. The fact is, they don't accept it. And I think the fundamental reason was, and why I hosted the first World Optimum Population Congress back in 1993, was because scientists hadn't developed a sufficient robust model of population. What was a sustainable population? And Paul Lightler came up with a figure about 2 or 3 billion for the Earth. So yes, I expect it to be speed up the decrease in population as people become aware, and it's education, internet, communication. That's what will do it.
A final word then, Nandita. As you've written extensively on these issues, what would be a final message that you would have that you see as a solution? If I were to ask you if there was a magic bullet out there, where would you start?
So since we are speaking about population and the word control has come up a few times, I'd like to start by saying that the key to population stabilization and reduction is to remove control, patriarchal control that is currently preventing girls and women from making authentic and liberated reproductive choices for themselves, whether that includes, like Poonam said earlier, not having any children or having smaller families, because we know that the number of children that women and couples end up having, it matches the norm within that society. So if a country, the norm is 7 children, then you ask a woman how many children she wants, she will say 7 because she wants to belong in the community. And when she says she desires fewer children or no children, there are punishments in place, such as divorce or domestic violence or social isolation. So I would say the first thing we need to do is remove population denialism, but then also countries like the US, which is the richest country in the world, needs to triple its family planning support from the current 600 million to 1.7 billion in order to meet the unmet need that women have. In countries around the world, 250 million women currently cannot access family planning and reproductive health care. And so that would be the first thing, an immediate thing. A rich country that spends $700 billion on its military budget to just give 1.7 billion to empowering women around the world to be able to make authentic and liberated choices.
I think that last data point that you just gave summarizes the state of the world. If we are going to spend that much on defense and that little on family planning, it tells a lot about the world in which we live in and the long road that we still have, in a way, to put these issues of gender, climate action, and sustainability on the policy makers' top of the mind. I appreciate all my guests joining me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David, Poonam, Alistair, and Nandita there in the UK. Thank you.